the first thing I wanted to ask you, so I was coming home, actually back to our office yesterday from here, and I found myself in a very New York moment. I was in a cab, and the driver had Baby One More Time on, and I'm like looking at the New York skyline, and Britney Spears is blaring in the speakers, and I thought, you know, you used to be a music editor. What are you listening to right now? I would really love to know.
What am I listening to right now?
Is it Britney Spears?
I did listen to the non-auto-tuned version of Toxic that was floating around this week, which I didn't think was that bad. Toxic is still a great song. In our house, we listen to, it's just a rotation of Kendrick, Solange, and Frank Ocean.
Oh, good choice.
Just going around and around. That's been the past year. But yeah, that and Fleetwood Mac.
There you go.
Yeah, just enjoying good times.
This is going to be the only Britney Spears question you're going to have all year. So my question to you is, basically, could you tell me how you got this whole thing started, Kickstarter? Because you were a music editor, and now you're a CEO, and connect the dots for me.
Yeah, that's my boy back there crying, by the way. My only goal in life was to be a writer. Mm-hmm. And I really loved music, and my father's a musician. I was brought up like sort of, they're trying to make me into a musician, but I wasn't very good. But I was a good writer, and so that...
Come on
hi,
up
boy.
here.
Hi, Kochan. And so, I'll see you later. Sorry, that's Koji. But anyway, yeah, so I wrote about records for like the Village Voice and Spin and New York Magazine, and just like making a living through $50 increments for about 8 years. Mm-hmm. But midway through that, I was at a restaurant here in Williamsburg, Diner, also run by the folks who run Reynard's, where I was a regular, and I met a guy there who was working there who was my co-founder of Kickstarter. He was the guy who had the idea. His name is Perry. He's an artist, and he had been living in New Orleans and had this idea to throw a concert, but he needed to front 20 grand to do it, which he could not do, but he had this idea of what if he just put the concept of the show online, everyone puts up their credit cards to buy a ticket, but no one gets charged unless the show sells out. So rather than him having to front the 20 grand, it's just sort of like, do the people want it? Cool. If not, no big deal. But he had that idea in 2001, and that's like a different universe of the internet. That's like pets.com was the only site we were all using then.
And Williamsburg, for
yeah,
that matter.
And Williamsburg was a different time then too. And yeah, and so we just started working on it. And I think the thing that we really thought about was that for the sort of art and culture that we liked, things that are more indie, you know, more art house, nobody was making money on those things. And it was clear that the systems that existed, you put money into something in the hopes that you'll get a return. You want to fund a blockbuster or a hit record, but putting money into a true art project that has no desire to produce a lot of revenue is just a non-starter for people. And so we liked the idea of creating a universe where there was no profit motivation. It was simply about, I want this to exist, I'm excited about it, and trying to remove the forces of money from the creation of art. And it's ironic considering we're a platform, a fundraising platform, to say we're like, you know, pushing against the impact of the influence of money on art. But I do think that it being about simply funding the budget of making something versus funding in search of upside are very different motivations and create very different environments. But it came from just wanting weirder culture to exist and feeling like the system that we live in, the capitalist way of approaching everything, is just not a good fit for that. So let's create a new system.
I will come back to the arts funding thing because I think it's a very interesting one. But let me focus a little bit on that flip. So like I said, you were a music editor. Then you decided to do this. You had a good idea. You were, like many technology startups, you were solving your own problem, essentially, right? That's how it came to be. But how did you decide, you know what? I don't want to be a writer, or I'd rather do this whole thing and do all of the, because being an entrepreneur, as you folks just heard from Sally, I mean, it's not easy. You have to do all the jobs.
Yeah, well, I think that there's like a little bit of playing doctor that you do for a while. Like you just kind of pretend. Like I remember Perry and I we bought a whiteboard at Staples, and that was like the most businessy thing I'd ever done in my life. And it felt weird, but like kind of thrilling, you know? And so it was just like, oh, what does it feel like to try to be, not myself? And so that had its own excitement, but you read a lot. Like for us, reading Fred Wilson's blog, AVC, we just like learned what entrepreneurship is. We had no idea, and he's so open. That was phenomenal. Another one was a book by a woman named Jessica Livingston called Founders at Work, which is like people like Ev Williams telling the story of how they made Blogger. And that just gives a real clear picture of what the struggle is. Yeah. So that was really helpful, being like, okay, so this is what to expect. But at a certain point, you just have to go for it. And honestly, that was a hard thing for me. I still had a day job. I was a editor-in-chief at a music service called eMusic, and I liked my job. I loved the team I worked with. And up until 5 months after Kickstarter launched, I still had that day job. And I didn't have any savings, had no money at all, so the idea of quitting and having no income was scary for me. But in truth, that was only part of it. It was also just that risk was one that was tough. And yeah, I was the last one to jump. Of the 3 founders, I was the last one to leave my job. And so, anyone here that's struggling with that question of quitting your job to go for something, yeah, that's like a real struggle. And, don't feel embarrassed about being afraid to make the leap. That's very legit. But as soon as I did, it was like, oh, wow, why was I worried about this? This is so clearly the right thing to do. But yeah, that was very hard.
That wasn't so bad, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Now you have how many employees?
130 people work at Kickstarter, a few of them here. What's up, Miguel, Chloe, Glory? What's up?
130 people. So
yeah.
We just talked about the entrepreneur's struggle at the very onset. Let's talk about managing that scale, that growth. Do you still have the whiteboard, by the way?
Yeah, I don't know. Probably not. There are bigger whiteboards. Well, that's what happens. Imagine. You get bigger whiteboards.
Yeah. But how have you? I mentioned that you have to do all the jobs when you're an entrepreneur, but sooner or later, you start hiring people. You start deciding what to give up, and one of the interesting things I imagine for you has been to decide what to do and what not to do. Okay, that person's going to do that. I'm going to focus on this. How have you thought about that as you've gone from 3 to 130?
Well, it's founding. I guess it's such a deified role now. I mean, I think I really lament that like kids grow up and want to be Mark Zuckerberg and not like Julian Casablancas or Michael Jackson or something. Like I'd much rather people aspire to that. But it's like kind of the figure of our age, and yeah, there's it's a very specific type of job, and probably the biggest challenge is that as you become more successful or not, but as it grows, your job changes enormously, and nobody tells you. Nobody tells you. You wake up one day to realize, oh wait, the way I've been approaching everything for the past 6 months is not relevant to where we are now. And knowing how to read those signs is very difficult. But a lot of it comes down to, as you said at the beginning, nothing happens unless you do it. So I remember very distinctly like laying in bed, falling asleep at night and thinking, no one is doing anything right now to help Kickstarter because we're all like going to sleep, and that became an anxiety. And
man, if that isn't an entrepreneur's thought right there.
It's true though.
I'm sleeping. I'm wasting my time.
If no one is pushing that rock up the hill, nothing is happening.
Right.
It's just the truth. And so, but you have to let go of that because you need other people to have the opportunity to find what their purpose is. And that evolution is a really hard one. And it's one that I have definitely struggled with. And every time you think you have it figured out, you realize you don't. It's changed again. But there's, I mentioned Fred Wilson's blog earlier, but he has a really canonical post about what the job of a CEO does, and he says that the job is 3 things. It's know where you're going, so have a vision and direction for the company, to hire the people that can get you there, and to make sure there's enough money in the bank. And his thing is literally you should do nothing else than whatever it takes to support those things. So don't try to build the product. Don't try to do everything. Just focus on those things, and that's how you build an organization that can replicate itself, sustain itself. And so I try to hold that mantra in mind. It's easier at times than others. but yeah, that not knowing what true north is really tough. The not knowing is something that you have to become very comfortable with, and that's a hard thing, especially for an entrepreneurial personality. That can be hard because they're so, it's such hard driving, like straight line, gonna make it happen. But then you reach a point where it's like, what the fuck am I supposed to do?
Right.
Like, there are 30 things that we could do. What am I supposed to do? And you can get lost there. You can get lost there. It's very easy to.
Yeah, especially in the details, right? Let's talk a little bit about recruiting, hiring, since you just mentioned leaning on other people. Yeah. We're in New York. There's a lot going on between, Silicon Valley, New York, tech scene, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, lately it's been also Los Angeles. You're a company based here. How are you thinking about hiring when it comes to technology talent, or frankly, even broader than that? Because I don't even know what technology talent means right now.
Yeah, I mean, being based in New York, who here has a company that's based in New York? Who is yeah, it's the best because you're like, yeah, come live in New York. Guess, sorry about how expensive it is, but, this is phenomenal. But, yeah, I mean, the Silicon Valley is, as people say, it's a one business town, and it's not a very, it's not a very warm or dynamic place. I mean, I go there a lot, and I still feel no sense of home or place there.
To be fair, this city isn't exactly warm and fuzzy either.
Oh, I disagree. But we've had a lot of success with recruiting in people. In the past week, we've had two in particular really amazing people join. One, we had a woman named Laura Hogan join as our VP of Engineering last week. She was the Director of Engineering at Etsy, real star, and so she's leaving to join us. And then just yesterday, Erica Joy Baker, who's a senior engineer at Slack and one of the founders of Project Include and a very prominent voice, announced that she's coming to join as our Director of Engineering. And for both of them, I think they were attracted by the team. Our VP of Product, a woman named Deepa, who was the head of product for the Hillary campaign and is just an absolute star. And especially
Three all-star women.
Three all-star women leading engineering and product for Kickstarter. Our executive team is, when everyone is finished joining, is 6 women and 3 men. So we are as progressive as you can be. And part of that comes from being a public benefit corporation, and we reclassified what we are as a business, and we made diversity and fighting against inequality a legal requirement of the company. So it's something you could not take more seriously. But we've seen enormous benefits from that. But that, for us, taking that stance of being, we are the un-Silicon Valley company, we are the non-maximizing company, we are the non-capitalist company, those points of difference are so strong out in the world. They signal what we're about. And I think the things that we are rejecting and that we have always rejected are things that people are coming to agree with us about. Mm-hmm. The notion of raising a lot of money, giving up control of a company, being a bad deal, the idea of not being a sustainable organization that supports yourself, just chasing money. And I think that's just a bad move. And so these are things that have always been true about us. They come back to that, our origin as artists and just kind of being like a punk rock company. And those things are connecting with people. Yeah. And they're connecting with the kind of people we want to work with. If anyone in this room is a designer or engineer and connects with this, say what's up. But those are people we want to work with, and it ends up being a really great filtering system for just who wants to be a part of our story.
Does everybody here know what a B Corp is? Shake your head, yes or no. If
B Corp is we are a B Corp, but B Corp is different than a PBC.
Oh, forgive me. Yeah. All right.
So
you might want to explain it.
Yeah, naming of these things is terrible. But so there are a couple different things. There's a thing called a B Corp certification. You see it on like Honest Tea bottles, and many products have that. That's a certification of like good corporate practice. You pay people fairly, you care about the right things, but it's just like it's like a good housekeeping seal of approval. But it doesn't dictate any action on behalf of the company, and you could still, I think you could probably be doing quite bad things and still be a B Corp. Another level farther is a public benefit corporation, and this is where you actually change your legal status into one where you are legally required to pursue a positive good for society just as equally as you're pursuing shareholder value. So the idea that a company's one job is to produce as much value for its shareholders, Milton Friedman idea that people accept as gospel over the last 40 years, you are saying we're not a part of that. And actually that how we help people is just as important. So it's a very new type of corporate type. Us and Patagonia are the most well-known companies that do that. Yes. So it's like a way more legit version of B Corp, although they all come from the same spirit. But at PBC, like your future actions are restricted. Yeah. So for instance, our PBC charter forbids us from ever using legal but esoteric tax avoidance strategy. Uh-huh. So we could never do that. We can never try to dodge taxes. If we could, someone could sue us and we'd be fired. It's fascinating. In a few minutes, I'm going to come to you guys for questions, so think about it, okay? Let's talk a little bit more about this. So come back to Silicon Valley. Such a streak of altruism, such a streak of mission. All tech companies, however defined, love to say, we're trying to improve the world, change the world for the better. And you've just outlined how they're not, essentially, because they're pursuing, in the interest of their shareholders rather than the world. Why don't we see more PBC corporations, PBC organizations? Why don't we? What's the disconnect here, in your view? It's still new. It's still new. So being a PBC, that became a legal thing 3 or 4 years ago. So it's still new. So we think this is the future. Yeah. I think that many Silicon Valley companies are pursuing good for society and are more progressive than the average company, and their products are doing many positive things. The challenge is that the system that it operates within, a venture capital system, investment system, are ones that exacerbate inequality, are ones that put the interests of privileged and upper classes above everyone else, and that even if you are an entrepreneur that manages to, you start a good company, you sell it, you become a billionaire, you give all your money away to charity, those are tremendous things to do for which you should feel so proud. However, you are also just reinforcing the same system that requires the need to give money in the first place. Yeah. Because you are personally maximizing. Even if you're also personally maximizing giving, you're still reinforcing a system that is guiding all of us to make as much as you can for you. And no question that has produced a lot of gains in society, but as we've experienced capitalism with the shackles off, in the past 30 years especially, I think we see there's a lot of negative impact of that I don't think is necessary. Mm-hmm. And so for us, it's just, honestly, it's pursuing that with a kind of restraint, with having a sense of a greater good beyond yourself. I mean, the 3 founders, we vowed from the beginning that we would never sell the company and we would never try to go public. Things that are where you personally enrich yourself, but we're like, but that's selling out. And that's not why we want to do something. That's how things become ruined. And why is it that we should aspire to have millions and millions of dollars? Why is that required? We've never had that before, and life has been fine. You did say you were a punk rock company, and you don't want to sell out. No, definitely not sell out. Yeah. That is a no-go for us. But why isn't that okay? So I just feel like we're all being sold the same story, and we have a system that's biased towards these same outcomes. Mm-hmm. And so there's just an incentivized system that is continually bending good people towards something that is not in the greater good. And so our thought, by forging this different path, and we're not done, we still have to land this in a solid way, but maybe we can create an alternative path for companies to follow. Maybe it is possible to be a small to medium-sized independent internet company, and that it's not just monopoly or bust. Right. Fascinating. All right, questions, hands, please. Yes, sir, all the way over here.
I'm going to pass this down for you.
Just following up on your last point about this alternative path, I think one thing a lot of folks are curious about with Kickstarter is, with your commitment not to sell or not to go public, you guys do have venture funding. So what's the deal you have? I assume that they want to get paid back with something eventually. How does that work?
Yeah, so we do have, I mentioned Fred Wilson, his blog, Union Square Ventures. He's our one venture investor. But we've raised very little money comparatively to what most companies do. It's in the range of $10 million over the course of 8 years. So So we are a small mark in their books. So certainly there's desire for them to have an outcome, but also because we did not raise a ton of money, those expectations I think are reasonable. But absolutely, we have obligations to our shareholders. We have obligations to our early employees and alumni of the company. Hi, Kendall. And we take those things very seriously. So there are financial outcomes. So last year, for the first time, we paid a dividend, and we also did a stock buyback. So we set aside money from our profits the year before and distributed among all of our shareholders and employees. We did that again this year, and that's something we want to continue to grow. And so when we hire someone, we explain to them, you get options in the company, but this is not a lottery ticket, the way other companies may promise. Instead, you can think of this almost like a royalty for a hit song you wrote in the 80s. And every year you get a check for a couple grand as long as this company exists or you are alive. And that's the deal. And that's the way that we will all benefit from this thing that we're creating together. And so we're all on that same plan. I am too, all of our shareholders. We want to continue to grow and produce more value so that those things can be more generous. But yeah, absolutely, that's an important part of it. But it's just not the only goal, and we are not willing to sacrifice, say, mission or our values or purpose in exchange for a bigger check for everybody. But we've always been clear about that, and there was no confusion or surprise. I mean, when you become a PBC, all of your shareholders have to vote for it. 2/3 have to vote yes for it to happen, and everyone knew this was our deal. So there was strong support. But yeah, there does need to be value. And the irony is that if we were a lottery ticket company, probably people would have gotten nothing in way of any financial outcome so far. Right. And here at least there is something, and over time I think it will net out to a lot more than what it would be if we were just trying to sell out.
Yeah.
The gentleman in the back has his hand up.
Oh,
yeah. Hard to see.
Yeah, really hard to see. There we are.
Awesome discussion, and just, it's really inspiring, Yancey. Could you talk a little bit about the tension, I guess, for businesses that want to become kind of public benefit corporations in early stages, if they've got kind of competitors in a category who don't want to follow those, I guess, kind of protocols? And I guess, obviously it's really great from a brand equity perspective and attracting talent and doing those things, but I guess when the money-hungry kind of competitor can scale and do things that are particularly, challenging, how do you negotiate that tension?
Yeah, totally. It's I think it was weirdly maybe an easier thing to do, although it's hard to do once you're already out the door, but it's kind of easier for us to do under success conditions than starting out from the beginning, because it's still so new that people are confused. We talk to entrepreneurs constantly who are trying to start as a PBC, and they regularly report investors being confused. Does this mean you're a communist? Like what, how do I interpret this? So it's still very fresh. It doesn't inhibit you in any way. You choose to write what's in your charter, so you can determine how it is you want to be accountable. We've chosen to make an annual report that assesses what we do. You don't have to do that. That's not a legal requirement. That's something we elected to do. And I think that the brand equity benefits are very real, but I think a lot of it comes down to investor education about what this means. And there's not a lot out there. So one of the things we pledged to do in our assessment this year is that we would produce some sort of platform that would share everything we've learned about how to do this, and a way for PBCs to educate others on how to become one, because we're having so many one-on-one conversations. And that's something we will get out this year. So we're starting to work on that now. So I think that would be helpful. But yeah, the benefits that we experienced making the conversion, one was definitely recruiting. People were more interested in working with us, even though they didn't really know what it meant. It was just like, you guys are legit. You're like trying something. I think the other really big benefit is that there are many issues, political, moral, values-based, where in the past we would maybe have a lot of debate about how we wanted to engage, whether we wanted to say something, what do we say. But our PBC charter mandates that we are a moral, outspoken, political organization, that we fight for certain things. And so it's removed the debate, because instead it's, well, we have a legal imperative to do these things. And so that clearer sense of purpose just gets rid of a lot of internal debate and lets us be bolder, lets us step up more. And we now approach problems with this thought of, well, what should a PBC do? We're one of the first to ever do this. We think this is the future. Maybe how we handle this situation creates some sort of how other people follow in doing this, so we should be very conscious about what it means as a PBC. So for example, the challenge that happens with Kickstarters is projects not fulfilling, right? That's the negative side of Kickstarter is that people will raise money and sometimes they will be unable to do what they said. And this has always been a part of the platform, so we really thought about how to approach it. And as a PBC, we thought, well, the public should have a full awareness of how this works, and the public should be able to make an informed decision about whether or not they want to be a part of this. So we partnered with the University of Pennsylvania to do a massive study into the outcomes of Kickstarter projects. Before even starting it, we said, whatever you find, we will publish. And they found that 9% of the time projects failed to be completed as promised. And then shortly after that came out, there was a project in the UK that failed, the biggest failure that ever happened, a drone that had raised over £1 million. And there again, we thought as a PBC, what should we do? So we hired an investigative journalist who was quite critical of crowdfunding, and we paid them money to do an exhaustive story that we gave them full access to the company, and we're like, write what happened, write what you think should be different. And we fully embraced that. So we just thought, as a PBC, the public should be fully aware of what the risks and downsides are of a business like ours. And if people choose not to use us and that affects our business, then that's a truth that we have to respond to. That has not been the case. But there's just this thought of like, all right, we're trying to set a higher bar, so let's meet it. Let's not just like do the same old, and avoid the harder things about what we do.
It's going to be interesting to watch this experiment unfold. Any more? Yes, right here.
Hi, Yancey. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your decision not to pursue equity crowdfunding under the new rules, and how you sort of think about that, given that competitors like Indiegogo have, and that might be something that your customer would be interested in.
Yeah, so equity crowdfunding became possible, I think, a year ago is when the SEC rules went into play. We've never had any interest. If you think from the very beginning, talking about why we started Kickstarter, and that the existing systems for funding projects were simply putting money into things that could produce a return, revenue, looking for hits, and the the safeness, the monoculture that produces. Yeah, we don't want any part of that. To me, the idea of taking what we've created, this democratic open system where the bar for what gets created has been lowered, and then adding financial upside on that seems like a step back to me. I don't think that is a positive evolution. I think that's, I can understand situations in which it is works for a community, but yeah, I don't think securitization of everything is automatically a positive thing. But yeah, certainly following it with interest. It's been slow going to start. In the UK, it's been quite successful with Seedrs and Crowdfunder, or Crowdcube, sorry. But one of the earliest, I talked to one of the earliest equity crowdfunding sites, a Swedish one, and they've been doing it for 7-8 years. And one of the things they shared is that there's no exits. There's no exits. The average pledge is $2,500, but there's no liquidity. It's just sitting there. You're waiting for a reward that never comes. So, I know how people feel like when they're waiting for a book they pledged for, or a drone, and it's 3 months late. We read those emails. I receive those tweets. And when it's $2,500 and you were hoping to make like Facebook money, what's the end game of that? So, yeah, I have concerns about it.
All right, one more. Yes, right here.
So I noticed earlier this year you guys rolled out a live streaming feature, and I wonder, where did you get your idea, and what's the outcome of this feature, and what do you see the live streaming play a role in the long-term strategy of your company?
Yeah, thank you. Late last year, we acquired a company based out of Vancouver called Huzzah, and they're a live streaming service just for artists that focused on private shows between musicians and fans. Very slick platform, great UI. Amanda Palmer was using it heavily. So we picked that up and now have a Vancouver team and folded into Kickstarter as Kickstarter Live. And the idea was, we imagined a couple use cases. Number one, while a project is live, someone can perform, play, do demos of their work. People can pledge while they watch. This happens. It is like, it feels very futuristic watching someone demo the thing they've made or play a song, and you can just support them right there in the window, but that's very cool. The other way it's being used is for project updates, so people doing like a live tour of the factory in Shenzhen, or here's our rehearsal. A couple weeks ago, we had an artist do a 24-hour live stream. His project lasted for only 24 hours, and the entire time he was live and doing like this performance that was, got pretty crazy at hour 17. But he raised like $9,000 in a day by doing that as a performance artist. Thought that was a great use case. But we see that as a way to bring backers and creators closer together. We know from talking to both sides, the most exciting moments are when people feel like they're conspiring. They're in it together. And so this product, at its best, that's what it's doing. I mean, the product we acquired is very interactive. That's really what the heart of it is. And so we see that as being a very visceral way for people to engage. So people are using it a lot. Creators are broadcasting a lot, and creators who do have very high success rates. But it's still a 1.0 version of the product. There will be major updates of Live coming in the future. But it's something we think really makes sense as a way to just make this platform very dynamic and let people feel engaged and connected around new ideas.